everyone! So today we are finally bringing back our series, Dolly Tales, which if you didn't know is our doll memory series. This is going to be dolls that shaped and changed our collection in some way.
So these are dolls that like drastically changed the way we saw ourselves as collectors or the way we felt about collecting, or maybe changed the way we played with our dolls as kids. So these are dolls that changed, usually in more than one way, who we were as doll lovers.
Yeah, and they are not necessarily favorites, and they're not firsts. In fact, there's only a few like firsts here because I didn't want to go for all stereotypical. And we tried to divide it fairly evenly between dolls that we had as kids and dolls that we had as adults. So we each picked 10 dolls to talk about. So there's about 10 in all from childhood and about 10 in all from adulthood, but it's not perfect. We just tried to keep it pretty even. And they're from all different makes and ages, etc. So we're going to get right into it. And I'm going to start with the predictable one here because honestly this is how I got into dolls. So this is my very first Barbie. This is 1989 Ice Capades Barbie, aka Christina. Honestly, she is the reason that I became a doll addict, and she is the reason that I became so enamored with secondhand dolls and doll identification and the thrill of like just rescuing dolls and giving love to unwanted dolls, because the story behind Christina is that our maternal grandparents worked at the Salvation Army when I was a really little girl, and they brought home a bag of battered, destroyed Barbies, and Colleen got to pick the dolls first because she's 4.5 years older than me.
So she was left with the rejects.
And she didn't want to leave me with any girl dolls, but of course our grandmother made her. So Colleen decided that Christina apparently was the least attractive to her, which I still don't understand.
I don't see it anymore either.
And so that's kind of the irony that this was Colleen's reject. And I remember I got them in a plastic bag, and there was my Ken doll, All-American Ken, Christina, and then a Skipper we don't have anymore because she was scary looking. Basically, she was half bald, naked, didn't have her outfit, still don't have her outfit, and with just a bunch of random things. And I remember pulling her out of the bag and looking at her, and she honestly took my breath away. Like, I remember that feeling of magic, and every time I look at Christina, I feel that way. And it's not that I don't have cooler or more pretty dolls, or that she was even like a favorite in terms of how much I played with her, but she's what made me really appreciate just dolls in general, because I was like a tomboy growing up. I wasn't into, stereotypical girly things, so it's not like something that I wanted to pursue on my own. So just randomly getting a doll like her is what sparked it on, because I didn't know who she was for years, because I didn't know what she came in. That sparked my interest in doll ID. I really wanted to know what do her markings mean, what was she supposed to come with. So that's why I'm such a doll identification fanatic, and also because she was literally a half-bald, naked reject of someone else's and Colleen's. That made me love dolls with a similar story, and I reference her a lot. If you read my Flickr, or sometimes in Dolly Transformations, I'll say that like, oh, this kind of reminds me of the story of Christina.
I picked this bedtime Kelly doll. In later years we named her Jill. I got her around either 2nd or 3rd grade. And the reason I chose to talk about Jill is because before we had our first 2 Kellys, the only small like doll we had that wasn't like a regular Barbie was our Skipper Daphne, and she was so close in height that I didn't really see her any differently. But this to me was a novel idea, like a Barbie child, and I got really hung up on it. And for a few years Kelly was all that I collected, and even though that's not really a part of my life anymore, and I consider Jill to be completely Shelly's now, it was a lot. It shaped who I was when I was young, and to this day I tend to gravitate toward Stacy and Skipper.
So this is Bath Time Fun Kelly. And yeah, both of them are in pretty rough shape. She has a reroot, and Jill clearly met Shelly's salon at some point. So the story behind her is that I got her the same day as Colleen, doll Jill over there. We got them with our allowance money, and that was the first time we ever saw Kelly dolls. I was about 4 at the time. I really liked the African American dolls, and growing up especially, there weren't a lot of ethnic variations of dolls. I mean, we were way luckier than the kids of like the 70s. But, you know, back in the early mid-90s, there wasn't tons of like AA dolls or Asian dolls. You'd get like a few here and there. And I was just enamored by them. And I mean, I always thought as a kid that African American people were like the most beautiful in the world because I was a blonde little girl. So of course, you know, I wanted to live vicariously through a doll. So for me, when I got this doll, it made me see like a passion in collecting African American dolls and ethnic dolls, and that's a huge part of who I am today. I love collecting Christy, and Addie was my first American girl, and that was because of this Kelly doll. And also, she reminds me of the time that brought Colleen and I together. A lot of people seem to think that we were always close, and that's not true. We hated each other. Well, she hated me.
I hated her. She was groveling. And
there were physical fights. Colleen would bully me and put me down. How things have changed. We didn't get along, and Colleen would basically tell me I couldn't touch her stuff and I wasn't allowed to play with her. But when we got these Kelly dolls, she really took a shine to my Kelly doll. And we ended up having this game with my Princess Mermaid Ariel and this Kelly doll named Kelsey. And that was the first doll game that really brought us together, and that's kind of what started dolls bringing us together.
My next doll is going to be very obvious. My American Girl doll, Molly, and I know you guys are probably sick of seeing Molly, but I have a good reason for bringing her in this video. The reason is because she was our first 18-inch doll. Like, before then, we were really into Barbie. I mean, even like the smaller things, like Polly Pocket and those like little Disney sets, like that we would play with sometimes, we were really more into fashion dolls, so everything else was short-lived. And Molly, on the other hand, she is a fashion doll. She's just a bigger fashion doll, and she really got us into that. And without Molly, would we have the 41 American Girls we have today? Probably not. She really got us into something that otherwise we wouldn't go for, and I think that led into like why we're open to like the big Bratz babies and the Moxie teens and anything of a bigger scale. And the other reason I picked Molly is because I think she represents me as a person, because she was like, I've had many like obsessive interests. She was the first book series that I openly admitted to liking. She was that first for me. She was my first major obsession.
This guy is Coco from Pocahontas. This is not my childhood doll, but he represents himself in my childhood doll. So, to me, when I look at Coco, he, number one, represents my love of guy dolls. Because for me, I never really saw a difference between the girl and guy dolls. A lot of little girls were like, ew, man doll. But for me, that was never the case, because as I mentioned with Christina, I got my All-American Ken at the same time. And I was just like, oh, cool, dude. So for me, I was kind of drawn to guy dolls. I had another one that I don't have anymore that I got at a yard sale, but he was my first brand new guy doll. And I picked him out at the store for my allowance money, and not only was he a guy doll, and by the way, I wanted him over John Smith because I totally had a crush on Coco in the movie. Like, I was like, as Logan. But I wanted the whole line, because when I remember picking him out with Mom, and I looked at the back of the box, and I'm like, oh, I already have Pocahontas, and now I have Coco. I'd like to have John Smith and Tacoma. And while to this day I'm still not a completist, I don't necessarily complete full lines unless it's something I'm really crazy about, like American Girl limited edition outfits or Bratz or Monster High. I do think that collecting can be interpreted in different ways, whether it's collecting a certain type of doll or for a certain era, or completing lines, or just giving your dolls appropriate things. Like the Disney dolls have Disney clothes and the Monster High have Monster High, and he represents that. I think he also represents my own unique, bizarre interest that could kind of be controversial at times. I mean, there's nothing controversial about Coco, but as a kid, I don't know, I think I always surprised Mom and Dad with my interests. And, you know, being a tomboy and being like, no, I want the car bed and I want to be Batman. And, like, you know, I wasn't like a special snowflake, but I wasn't like Colleen. I wasn't a traditional, like, girly girl. And even as I got older, it would be like, I would press things like, I'd be like, oh, I want Britney Spears dolls, and I like Britney Spears music, and my mom really had a problem with Britney Spears. And when Bratz came out, they were really controversial, and I got into those, and I just kind of always, I guess, liked things that maybe at the time pushed the envelope. And even when I first colored my hair orange in high school, like to this day, like in town, people will know me for having orange hair. Like, oh, I saw you on TV when you graduated with your orange hair. Like, someone told me that one time.
That's crazy.
When he ran into me and Dad. And like, it's not really all that different, but I guess I kind of pushed the envelope in some ways.
Yeah, and I think the fact that her interests have always been off the beaten path, I think that instead of having the latest or the greatest or the thing that everybody else wants, Shelly kind of just sees what she likes that makes her happy and genuinely interests her. And I actually feel like over time that's rubbed off on me, so.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I never truly cared if things went together. Like, if I was a contradiction in myself and my interests were. Like,
yeah.
I'm not a very feminine person, but I love dolls, and I don't care that that's a contradiction. And, like, I might dress a certain way, but I act a different way, or I like dolls that kind of are totally different than each other. And that's why my channel is a mishmash of different dolls and things. And I think also he represents, for me, a shift in, like, collecting, because I couldn't keep my original Cocoam. He had chewed feet, he had cut hair, his face paint was rubbing off, his legs used to come off all the time. So when I got back into collecting in 2011, I tracked him down online, and I had to throw out my old guy. And it made me see that even though sometimes you have to let go of like the physical object, that the memory still remains. And when I look at him, even though I really don't remember my childhood Cocoam looking like this, he still makes me feel very much the same way, but he also embodies a new memory and like of that time in my life.
And also to me, he represents, before we had Leroy and Jasmine as a couple, no doll games, we actually Cocoam and Esmeralda. So to me, he's kind of the pioneer of the new doll family. So he altered the way we played.
Where you played with the guy and I played with the girl.
I'm glad Katie falls right after Cocoam because, like Cocoam, this isn't our original. Shelly bought a red-haired doll in a bumblebee outfit just like this. We got into this huge kid core kick, and I was into Jody, and she actually started out playing with Katie, and our first couple Katie dolls were hers. But then, for some reason, she got bored and I picked him up and I took a major shine to Katie. It's weird because she was the thing that stayed after we went on our Barbie boycott and we like weren't playing with real Barbies, we only wanted to play with the clones, or as we call them, the fakies, for a while. She was like the doll that like bridged that gap. She came back over with us and stayed a prominent figure. So I chose this Katie because she embodies our first Katie, and without her, I never would have gotten my Princess Katie. She really represents who I am to this day because Kid Core Katie is still a huge part of who I am and what I like, and a huge memory of how I played as a teenager. So
I also feel like she was one of the first things that Dad really noticed that you were obsessed in.
that's true.
Dad was never as astute at guessing what Colleen was into. Mom was better at that when it came to Colleen, so I remember he knew she liked Katie. Okay, so then my next doll is Superstar Barbie from 1976. This is Shayla. She's also one I talk about on my channel all the time. So I got her when I was 12. She was boxed at an indoor flea market. I remember seeing her one weekend and thinking, that's a really weird Barbie. Her packaging and logo is different and her skin tone's really weird. She's got to be old. I was very fascinated with her, but I couldn't think of like a use for her really. But she weighed on my mind, and Dad actually made a special trip out to the flea market to get her. I remember that. And I picked her out, and I think she was like $20 originally, but Dad haggled. And there's a few reasons why she's so notorious. I guess number one would be the obvious. She's the reason I don't keep dolls boxed. I don't keep dolls boxed. If you guys want to know, if you didn't know that, I open them all, and that's because, I mean, as a kid, I never saw the novelty of keeping a toy in a box. It just seemed like having a candy bar and not eating it. But when I got Shayla, I mean, you guys aren't going to be able to see from here, but all over her bosoms, she has like dark orange spots, and that's because her dress was fused to her. When I got her in 2003, she had been boxed for 26 years, and by that point her cheap like acetate dress had fused to her, and she, like, I didn't think I was going to be able to get it off, and I was really upset. Dad managed to cut it off without hurting the dress or the doll, thank God. That made me see like, wow, this is not good for dolls. And even though there was like a very brief like 4 months as an adult collector that I tried to keep dolls boxed, it was like very arbitrary and it didn't stick, and I was quickly reminded like, this is why we don't keep dolls boxed. And I'm not saying don't keep your dolls boxed, just for me personally it's a choice not to keep them boxed, and that's a huge part of who I am as a collector. I feel like I'm not into having like a museum kind of look. I like my dolls to be nice looking and maybe arranged in a thoughtful way and wearing somewhat appropriate clothes, but I don't want it to look like a toy store either. And she kind of represents that, but she also made me fall in love with the 80s Barbies. And that might sound weird because she's from the 70s, but after I got Shayla, I started noticing dolls at the flea market who looked a lot like her, who had like the same rhinestone stud earrings and rings like my day-to-night Barbie named Cheryl. And I got 2 cases of those dolls at the Salvation Army so many months later, and that was like my Loving You Barbie and like dolls like that I talk about a lot. And that's why I love the 80s. That's why it's my favorite decade of Barbie. It's kind of all because of Shayla, because I was just so fascinated and I wanted to know more, and they still really excite me, and that's a huge part of who I am as a Barbie collector. I'm really passionate about the 80s.
This is school photographer Becky.
You can carry on. My hands are starting to go purple, so I'm getting so dizzy.
Okay. So originally Becky was Shelly's doll, but now I would say that we both kind of see her as mine.
Oh yeah.
You know, Becky is sold in a wheelchair, and for some reason it fascinated me. And even though it was Shelly's idea to bring Becky into the family because someone she was playing with had one and she fell in love with her, I was the one that kind of held on to her and became really fascinated. But because I was by then like almost always strictly played with like the family members, like the younger dolls, it had been so long that I actually played with like a regular Barbie that instead of just being straight up, oh dude, can I use your Becky doll, I snuck her into this camping game. She started out as a bad guy and then I turned her good.
I wouldn't have cared either if you didn't.
And right, and that's why it's so weird.
I was always chilling.
And the reason why that game lasted like 2 months, it's one day we'll probably have a Dolly Tales episode just on that game. But there was like a 2-month game, and I think part of why I was so reluctant to end that game is because I didn't want to stop playing with Becky. She literally, from then till now, has literally been in every doll game we've ever played, am I right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Like, it's
more or less.
Yeah, it's rare, either her or another Becky, like.
She's really the only Barbie that you've consistently, like regular Barbie that you've consistently.
Yeah, and
you liked my Jello Fun Barbie too.
The reason I feel like that's significant to me is because A, she reminds me of that time in my life where a lot of my favorites, she is affiliated with those other dolls, but also because, mostly because she like changed me in a sense, and there was something so irresistible about her that even though I primarily to this day prefer the sibling dolls, I absolutely love Becky.
Okay, so now I'm on to dolls from my adulthood. I have extra ones from my adulthood, an extra one. So, will you keep your hat on? So this is Grumpy. He is made by a company called Bicken. He is like one of the very first like fashion Disney dolls from the 80s. And this was before Mattel had the rights to make Disney dolls. And the reason why I chose him for this video is because when I was growing up, I had a lot of bias for Mattel Disney dolls. And that's not to say that I had a thing against like the fakey Disney dolls, because it really didn't. I mean, I had like Anastasia. I know she's not Disney, but you know, like there were character dolls that weren't made by Disney that I was still very intrigued with. But the Mattel dolls, just they wore other dolls' clothes nicely and things. You know, they were made with materials that I didn't get sick from. But when I got back into collecting, I kind of originally only planned to collect like Mattel dolls from this year to this year. But I saw on eBay when I was looking at Snow White dolls, oh, like these Bicken dwarfs all the time, they're very common. And they stole my breath away. And to this day, like Grumpy and Happy especially, they still make me feel that way. And God, I can't imagine my collection without them, because they fill me with so much joy. And he's one of the reasons I really loved Snow White stuff, because Dad bought me these dwarfs. I guess it made me really open-minded to just be like, Tycho Aerials and, oh, Disney store dolls. It made my collection so much more diverse, and I feel like that trickled into not just like Disney and character dolls, but also into just regular Barbies. It made me more open-minded, I guess, in the long run to dolls of different manufacturers.
This is the last childhood doll of mine that I'm going to talk about. This is Chandler, 1992, my first Ken. The reason why I picked Chandler is because originally he was kind of just like this random purchase. Most of these dolls were random purchases. He was like 50 cents. I think he was just wearing a blue shirt, nothing on his lower half. I took pity on him and I started playing with him instead of Leroy, my Water Jewel Magic Aladdin. And he ended up being my favorite Ken doll, but it was more than that because not only was he my favorite Ken doll all of a sudden, but he made me like really interested in Ken for a while. Like I was suddenly buying Ken fashions, and I was suddenly just more interested in like Ken as like a separate entity apart from Barbie. I started to see him more like as valuable as Skipper as Stacy, like as his own person and not just, you know, an accessory. I would say the reason why our Ken dolls are like more mine than Shelly's,
even though I'm more into guy dolls generally.
Right, is actually because of Chandler. I would say he's what changed that in me.
Okay, this doll should come as absolutely no surprise if you know anything about me as a Bratz collector, but this is World Twins Nevaeh. Yes, I did name my former guinea pig Nevaeh after her. So when I was growing up, obviously this doll was not out because I stopped buying Bratz in like 2005, very early 2005. So when I got back into collecting, I felt kind of weird, ironically, about having secondhand Bratz because they weren't a thing when I was a kid. It was all pretty much store-bought Bratz because they just weren't hitting the flea markets yet. It was weird to have dolls that I didn't know who they were and they didn't have the right outfits and that they weren't perfect because I took really good care of my childhood Bratz. And the day I got Nevaeh, I had bought a few other Bratz for her, but I thought that they were wearing the right clothes. And when I saw her, I was like enchanted. I remember she was in a box and I pulled her out and she was wearing this Rock Angels skirt and some skinky top, and I just saw her and I'm like, wow. And I wasn't gonna get her. I was like, no, I don't need this. I don't need to buy a lot of Bratz dolls. Like, they're kind of ugly and I'm not gonna display them. I'm still mostly a Disney person. But lo and behold, 5 minutes later, I was back there digging up Nevaeh, and what ended up happening with her is that I cleaned her up and I put her downstairs with my other Bratz dolls, and every day I would go downstairs to visit her because I couldn't bear to be apart. I'm not joking. I was that obsessed with this doll, and then she ended up moving into my room and sitting on my printer, which was in my bedroom at the time, before I had dolls all over the place. I know, can you imagine? And anyways, long story short, that's basically how I ended up with Bratz dolls in my room, because honestly, I wasn't planning on collecting Bratz dolls when we got back into dolls. I thought I was just going to exclusively collect Disney and it was going to be kind of like a side thing, not an all-consuming lifestyle, and then I would have Bratz dolls wall to wall. I did not envision any of this, but she's the reason for that, and she really changed like the way I display dolls, and she shaped my Bratz collection because she reminded me of why I love Bratz dolls so much. And it kind of made me see, like, why do I care that she doesn't have her outfit? She's really cool and she's fun to dress.
I wanted to talk about Shelly's Phoebus doll.
Canadian Phoebus.
Yes, this Phoebus was from an eBay listing in Canada. And the reason I picked Phoebus is because he was the doll that we bought early on in our doll collection that actually made me like beg Shelly to go downstairs and play for a few hours, because I had a Phoebus paper doll as a kid and I really liked him, and to have like a 3D version of that like in Barbie's size was just wow.
You had a lot of fun with him.
Yeah, he just really made me like feel like a kid again around dolls. And the other reason I picked him is because, you know, he's on Shelly's display and he lived in Shelly's bedroom instead of the computer room for quite some time. So he like actually lived in her room and everything for a long time. But because if we were playing with dolls, I would like want to play with him. He's like kind of like not hers or mine, he's like more ours. So he's special for that reason, so I wanted to talk about Phoebus.
Okay, so I have another Bratz doll. Don't worry, this is the only other Bratz doll. I was good. So this is Bratz Boutique Yasmin from 2012. I'm gonna call her Yasmin because that's what I call Yasmin dolls. My dad used to call her that, so please don't be triggered. So the reason why I chose her, I have a few Bratz dolls in my collection that I could have kind of chosen for this, like in the Wild Jade, but I chose her because she's the first one that I can really remember. So when I got back into collecting Bratz, I did buy some occasionally at the store, quite a few actually, but I complained a lot about them.
Yeah, I think it's the difference between buying and embracing.
Yeah, so like obviously when I bought certain dolls, it's not like I'd necessarily sit and complain about them all the time. Sometimes I did because that was who I was back then. But I would, as a whole, I was one of those people, which might be hard to believe, where I was like, I love new Bratz. They have these ugly bodies and they're so cheap, and you know, I guess that's probably why I have very limited patience for people who leave me those kinds of comments. And it's like, you're entitled to have your opinion, but I used to be that person and I don't like who I used to be. So I was that person, and it was I would analyze everything. And I remember, I didn't even know this line was coming out because I just didn't. It was at Kmart though. We were there one day, and I saw it. And I looked at this doll's face, and that feeling that I felt was magical, like with Christina. I, honest to God, felt like 11-year-old Shelly going to pick out her first Expressive Yasmin doll at KB Toys. She, like, I don't know what it was about this doll, but she was magical. And I didn't know if she had saran hair or nylon hair or Connectlon hair, because that was a problem for me back then. I didn't know, like, what quality she would really be when I got her out of the package, but I kid you not, I couldn't leave her there. I sat there on the floor like a kid staring at her, debating about whether or not I should fork over the $30 for her, because that's a lot of money. And she ended up coming home with me that day, and I guess she made me really embrace Bratz dolls. And even though at first, when they made them tall, I was kind of a little like, ugh. But overall, she was what made me into I love them all, and they're all just Bratz, and that trickled into other types of dolls. And like I said, people are entitled to have their opinions about different generations and qualities, but for me, it's like, I don't want to think about it like that. I don't want to have to analyze and basically say, well, you know, this Yasmin, as much as I love her, she's inferior to my childhood one because she's not from 2002, and she's not made with this and that. I'm glad that I'm not like that anymore.
This is Sharon's sister Skipper, and I picked her because Shelly cracked and asked Dad to buy her Satin Shimmer Mulan doll on eBay. And that was what got Shelly going in terms of buying again. But I was kind of like, up until this point, I'd been kind of like a encourager, but like in a more passive way. I wasn't out buying dolls. But what happened is I saw Skipper, Stacy, and Barbie together at an indoor flea market, and even though I passed up just as great dolls, like I passed up a boxed Wedding Todd, I could not leave her behind. She was all I could think about. So even though we weren't as big into Barbie, we were mostly collecting Disney at that point, I wasn't about to leave her behind. And that, I think, is an important thing for me, because she reminded me that I loved Skipper the way that Nevaeh reminded you that you love Bratz. It kind of made me see that the old me, like how you were with the Bratz, that you didn't, over those 5 years, forget what you really liked. It was still there, underneath.
You to be unearthed.
And that's what Skipper did for me, so I really love her. She's one of my favorite dolls.
This young man should be of no surprise. This is Scarith, Deuce Organ, who I love, obviously. So I chose him because he's kind of the reason I got into Monster High, and Monster High is a really important chapter of me as a doll collector, and I guess like he's also representative of me being really passionate about guy dolls, and he's actually the reason I went out and got my Punk Seaton, who's my favorite Bratz boy. I didn't have him at the time, but seeing Deuce around made me remember, like, oh, I love dolls with mohawks. That was also why I used to love Coco, and by the way, he has a mohawk. Yeah, I didn't see him in stores. I had a really hard time finding him. But when I decided that I wanted to get into Monster High, it was ultimately because I wanted this Deuce doll. And I had been kind of for months stalking Monster High online and kind of thinking about it, but Colleen thought they were really ugly, and I was like, oh, I really don't need to open that door. I don't need to be one of those people. But when I realized that they released Deuce for Scaris, I was like, oh, he's a budget doll. Oh, I can actually just go to the store and buy him, and he's not done on the Dance Deuce. Yeah, I knew what one I wanted. But he'll do, and I guess he also kind of, for me, is representative of that too. That sometimes you can't get like the exact dream doll that you want. It's this Collings post on Flickr, love the one you're with, that sometimes the doll you settle for is the one that you love even more than than your like grail doll. And I mean, I love my Dawn of the Dance Deuces. I have two. But I also have 3 of him. So yeah, he really means a lot to me for that reason. And I guess Monster High was how I coped with losing Dad. And that's a really important part in my collection and me as a collector, because I guess from binging on Monster High, it made me see how I was spending my money and why I was buying dolls differently. It took me a long time to deal with my shopholism, but it made me realize that sometimes like the more you buy, it doesn't fill the void that you feel inside, and that you have to find another way to cope. And I don't regret buying any of the dolls I bought on those binges, but I feel like dolls like him were kind of the start to me, like healing on the inside. And that's one of the reasons why on my channel I try not to promote that you always need to have a new thing and it's buy, more, more, and more, because that's not at the end of the day going to make you a happier and more satisfied collector. And although I can say I mind having, what, 140 something, 50 something, I don't know, however many Monster High I have.
You have 173.
Oh, okay. Oops. I can't say I mind, but you don't need that many to love your dolls. That's bad.
It's really funny, actually. So I picked Quick Curl Skipper because, I had like an older Skipper growing up, vintage Skipper, and I was like, oh, she's not one of those like ones with the 87 body and head mold, and I had like a lot of the 95 molds growing up, and I'm like, no, they're not the 87 mold. And I think that when I got her, she was one of 3. I got Workout Teen Skipper from 87, and this Quick Curl doll, and Sungold Malibu Skipper. The thing is that I was least excited about her initially because Sungold Malibu had a decrepit swimsuit on, and the Workout Teen was one of those ones from that era I loved to collect. But when we put her in the sink when we got home, and the dirt and the filth melted away, and I realized that she has this like beautiful pale skin tone, and she's actually like brand new underneath all that dirt, I realized that she was like beautiful, and that your first impression of something, like, she's kind of like a diamond in the rough. Don't judge a book by its cover. That there's more than meets the eye, and if you give something love, it might not even take that much work to make it beautiful again. So she represents me as a secondhand collector, but also as someone who's kind of started to love all generations of dolls, because initially I was kind of too cool for the modern Skippers that fell after 87, like the 87 head and body mold, that is, and too cool for the ones before that. But I think that she made me kind of embrace all generations of Skipper, which led to me, losing my snobbery about other things as well. So
Well, that's Surprise Sophina. Again, she was kind of interchangeable with the Avery and the Bria from her line, but I chose her because, so she changed my collection in a few different ways. Long story short, after my dad passed away in 2012, I had an old Flickr account. I did that for about a year and a half. I deleted it in October of 2013, and the reason for that was because I felt like the environment online was really toxic, and that it was changing me as a collector and making me, I guess, really paranoid and stuck up, and it kind of sucked the fun out of being a doll collector for me. And so when I deleted my account, not planning to be back on social media, I used it as a time to rediscover myself as a collector. And so for me, one of the first things I gunned for was actually Moxie Girlz, and she was one of my earliest Moxie Girlz that I bought around that time frame, and I just kind of found her at Walmart on sale, and I was like, oh, Moxie Girlz, because I was into that. And I guess it's important to me, that story, because sometimes you have to block other people's voices out and only listen to your own. And as much as I love social media in terms of it's great to get inspiration and motivation, and maybe other people having a certain opinion can open your eyes to something, I do think it's really important to listen to your own gut. And for me, Moxie Girlz really helped me connect with that and learn to just follow the beat of my own drum and like what I like regardless of what anyone has to say. And she also really inspired me, as did the dolls from her line, because they're just these really cheap dolls, low quality. Nylon hair, painted bodices, unhemmed skirts, gimmicky. Not my kind of thing, not the kind of thing I would have bought as a kid, but I was like on a binge at the time. I was like, Moxie Girlz, so I just bought them. And I mentioned this in my video, Perfectionist Deception, that sometimes it's not about like the quality of a doll, it's about what you put into it. And at the time, I was making doll earrings and the occasional hairpiece, but it wasn't a huge part of me as a collector. It was something I did like here and there. But when I saw these dolls, I don't know what it was. I saw the fabric flowers in my like little craft case, and I was like, huh, that would match Sylvina's outfit. And all of a sudden, I saw all this potential. I could make her earrings and a hairpiece, and once I did that, I was like, wow, and they become some of my favorites. And I feel like that's a really huge part of who I am as a collector now, that if you just give something love, and you give it a little extra boost, if you give something the time of day, and you know, if you just see everything as an opportunity to express yourself and be creative, that you will love it so much more and it'll be so much more rewarding. And so this is where my tacky earrings came into play. I started making really tacky earrings too. So that was fun. I stopped caring about things being realistic and hey, take it or leave it. You don't have to like my earrings. I get they're not for everyone, but I'm like, yes, pom-poms. So that's a really big part of who I am, and that was a turning point.
Shelly's swim class Dracula doll, and the only real reason I picked her instead of Venus or Laguna from her line, who we got with her, is because she was the first one we opened. She was one of Shelly's very first Monster High dolls. She was the first one of the three that we opened, and initially I was like, first I told Shelly, no, we're not getting into Monster High, that's stupid. No, we're not getting into Monster High, that's tacky. No, we're better than that. No, I don't want to waste our money on that. But then after a while I started seeing them around stores, and I noticed sales, and I'm a sucker for sales, and I'm like, one day I said to her at Big Lots, I said, you know, these are actually nice, affordable dolls. And she's like, yeah. So I said, okay, we can look for dupes, but I think rather than let your first purchase be like something you have to buy on eBay, I think you should just kind of buy some cheap and see if you like them first. So we went looking around, and she got hung up on the idea of Swim Class Laguna and wound up buying the whole line.
Yeah, and she literally just came to the register because I really wanted Venus and I really wanted Laguna. And I'm like, well, I might as well get her too.
We took her out and I realized it's just a doll. Like, it's just an adorable little doll. It's different, but still a doll. And that made me like suddenly go from hating them to loving them in like the span of a few minutes. And I really like her, and I would say she resonates with me more than like some of the older dolls we got boxed at an antique store that day.
My last doll here is my American Girl Nelly. I got her at the flea market in 2014, July 2014. I found her on a table in a Samantha outfit with just shoes, no underwear, no stockings, Sharpie under her eyes. Pictures of that are on my Flickr. Cut bang, scrubby skin, super loose body, everything imaginable that you can think was wrong with an American girl, Nelly had it. The thing is, I never wanted a Nelly doll as a kid, really. I mean, I fantasized about them all, let's be real, but it wasn't something I seriously wanted. And I didn't stalk her on eBay, which, again, I stalk a lot of dolls on eBay, so she clearly wasn't on my radar. But when I saw her, I was like, Nelly! And I ran over to get her, and even though they had her marked at 50, they let me get her for 25, I think? Yeah, I was like, if I don't buy her, someone else is going to buy her and have her head replaced. And I know I can get rid of those stains. And I know I can fix her hair. And I know I can clean her body. And I know I can re-straighten her. And if, like, I have all of these skills, and I want this doll, and she speaks to me, why do I need, like, the perfect Nelly? And so for me, she represents that of my inner like doll rescuer, loving junky dolls and being really excited by them, and also sometimes just letting the dolls that speak to you be the ones you buy instead of always carefully curating your collection. Like my video, Always Listen to Your Heart, that's kind of all about that. But she's also, even more importantly, the reason that we got heavily back into American Girl. We dabbled in it in 2011 and 2012 and 2013, but it wasn't a huge thing. But literally, when I got Nellie, within a few weeks, I had Julie and I had Ivy, and I was interested in Isabel, and like, she's responsible for every single American Girl after her, and I always say that in my American Girl collection videos. And she's just what really brought me back into the world of American Girl and made it fun again.
Definitely special. So this is the first edition, Bratzilla's Jade Jador. And the reason I picked her, it was actually Shelly who said I should pick her, because I would say 1,000 times, we are never getting that Jade Jador doll. That doll is so ugly.
Every time we were at a store.
I was like, that doll is ugly. We are not buying
her. Turn her around.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that, yeah. I was really offended by her because of the red eyes, and I don't know, right now she's just making me laugh, she's so cute. Like, what happened is, after a while, when I finally decided she was okay, I think it made me, like, kind of drop the last, like, vestiges of... I was done using absolutes after her, because now it's like, I might not like and love every item that they have for dolls in the store. There might be some doll types I'm still not into, but now I'm at the point where I'll never say never. You know, if it's the right price, or it happens in a bin and we feel like keeping it, it's like, I no longer consider myself too cool for anything. And the reason why I am so glad Shelly suggested her is because, you know, at first the Monster High characters, I was kind of the same way. Like, I only want the ones that sort of look like people. I don't want, like, you know,
Skelita.
The Skelita doll, or the with the weird rib cage, and, you know, the spider doll who we don't have, who I would totally buy now. Wydonna, thank you, with the eyes.
Avia Trotter.
And Avia is my favorite example. And the day that we bought Avia at the Salvation Army, and I was making her and Deuce dance together to my favorite Rob Thomas song, like, I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world. And I think that if it hadn't been for Jade, I might not have, like, gone the distance and embraced dolls like Avia, and I'm really glad I did. So Jade's an important part of our collection.
I think it's an important lesson, and this is why I don't believe in black and white and absolutes, because a lot of the times in life, the things you say you're never going to do, or the person you're never going to be, or the doll you're never going to buy is exactly who you become, and where your life ends up, and what dolls you have on your shelf. Because you know what? I was the kid when I was 13. Why would that girl color her hair blue? And this has been me for 10 years, so it's just a good representation of, like, on a very superficial level of how that can be. And I'm never going to be that crazy lady posting about dolls online like they're children. It's weird. So never say never. And I hope you guys enjoyed meeting these dolls, and we will be doing further installments of other topics. We hope you enjoy. Let me know if you liked this format. And until next time, love your dolls, love yourself, and love your life.